Good evening. As the world outside grows quiet, we invite you to settle in and let your mind drift back through the mists of time to an era shrouded in legend and shadowed by history. Tonight, our journey takes us to the heart of Britain, a land of ancient stones, whispering winds, and a story so potent it has resonated for over 1,000 years. We are here to explore the entirely intricate history of King Arthur and the profound betrayals that defined his saga. Close your eyes and imagine a world without electric light, without the constant hum of machines. The only sounds are the crackling of a hearth fire, the rustle of straw in a bedchamber, and the distant call of an owl. This is the world of post-Roman Britain, a mosaic of small kingdoms and tribal territories struggling for identity and survival. The mighty Roman legions who once brought order and paved roads have withdrawn. They have left behind a power vacuum, a landscape ripe for chaos. The people, the Romano-British, find themselves at a crossroads. The Roman villas are crumbling, the aqueducts are falling into disrepair, and the old Celtic traditions are re-emerging, mingling with the remnants of Roman culture. It's a time of profound uncertainty, of fear, and of constant vigilance against invaders from across the sea. The Anglo-Saxons, Germanic tribes from what is now modern-day Germany and Denmark, are arriving in their longships, seeking new lands, and bringing with them a new wave of conflict. In this tumultuous landscape, a figure begins to emerge from the mists of folklore and historical fragments: a leader, a warrior, a king. His name is Arthur. The stories tell us he is the one who will unite the fractured land, who will stand as a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. But who was Arthur, really? Was he a king in a shining castle, a knight in polished armor, or a chieftain in a muddy war camp? The historical sources, sparse and often contradictory, hint at a military leader, a dux bellorum, or leader of battles, who fought against the Anglo-Saxons in the 5th and 6th centuries. He is a ghost in the historical record, mentioned fleetingly in texts like the Historia Brittonum and the Annales Cambriae. Yet his legend grows into a monumental edifice of chivalry, love, and tragedy. The enduring power of the Arthurian legend lies in its universal themes. It is a story not just of battles and kingdoms, but of humanity itself. We find themes of duty versus desire, loyalty versus ambition, and the fragile nature of trust. The core of this epic, the very sinew that gives it strength, is the theme of betrayal. Arthur's story is not a simple tale of good against evil. It is a complex tapestry woven with threads of deep personal betrayals that unravel a kingdom built on ideals of honor and fellowship. We will explore the layers of this betrayal, starting with the very foundation of his kingdom. We'll look at the love triangle of Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot, a story of forbidden passion that compromises the very heart of the Round Table. We will examine the political betrayals, the ambitious lords who saw an opportunity in Arthur's idealism. Most poignantly, we will trace the ultimate betrayal by the man closest to him, Mordred, his son or nephew, who tears down the kingdom from within. These aren't just fictional plot devices. They are reflections of the human condition, timeless struggles that still resonate today. As we journey through this narrative, we won't just recount tales. We will place them in their historical context, understanding the world that gave rise to these legends. We'll consider the Celtic spiritual traditions, the Roman legacy, and the Anglo-Saxon onslaught, all of which contributed to the Arthurian narrative. The landscape itself, the misty hills of Avalon, the ancient stones of Stonehenge, the wild forests of Britain, is a character in our story, a silent witness to the events that unfold. So, let your mind relax and your imagination take flight. We are beginning a long, gentle journey. As the details of Arthur's world unfold, you may find yourself drifting into sleep, the stories weaving themselves into your dreams. This is a journey designed for peaceful listening, a calm exploration of a timeless legend. We will proceed at a slow, deliberate pace, allowing the rich details to wash over you, just as the waves of history have washed over the shores of Britain for centuries. Our first stop is the beginning, the moment of Arthur's mysterious birth and his early formative years. This is where the seed of his destiny is planted, and where the first shadows of future betrayals begin to lengthen across the land. The mists of time hang heavy over the hills and valleys of Britain, obscuring the precise figure of Arthur. And yet it is here, in the cold, wet soil of the late 5th and early 6th centuries that the seeds of his legend are first sown. As we drift through the centuries, we must first separate the man from the myth, a task that is both challenging and essential. The historical record for this period is frustratingly thin, a tattered tapestry of fleeting mentions and second-hand accounts. The Romans, who had meticulously documented their time in Britain, had departed around 410 AD, leaving behind a power vacuum that would be filled not by a single unified government, but by a patchwork of warring kingdoms. This era, often called the sub-Roman period, is the backdrop for our story. It is a time of immense struggle, as the native Romano-British population grappled with the relentless incursions of Anglo-Saxon tribes. The earliest historical references to a figure who might be Arthur are found in Welsh sources, written centuries after the events they describe. One of the most significant is the Historia Brittonum, attributed to the Welsh monk Nennius in the 9th century. In this text, Arthur is not a king but a dux bellorum, a military leader or commander, who is said to have led the Britons in a series of 12 battles against the Anglo-Saxons. The final and most famous of these is the Battle of Badon, where Arthur is credited with carrying the image of the Virgin Mary on his shield and single-handedly slaying hundreds of foes. This image of a powerful, divinely favored warrior is a far cry from the chivalric king we know, but it is the foundation upon which the entire legend is built. Another crucial source is the Annales Cambriae, a 10th century compilation of Welsh annals, which mentions the Battle of Badon, and another, the Battle of Camelot, where Arthur and his nemesis, Mordred, both fell. These brief mentions are the closest we come to a historical Arthur, a powerful but shadowy figure whose exploits were so great they became indelibly etched into the collective memory of a people fighting for their survival. From this fertile ground of history and folklore, the legend of King Arthur's birth began to blossom. The most enduring version of this tale comes from Geoffrey of Monmouth's 12th century masterpiece, Historia Regum Britannia, the history of the kings of Britain. While Geoffrey presented his work as a genuine history, it is a magnificent work of fiction and myth-making that cemented the Arthurian legend for future generations. According to Geoffrey, Arthur's father was Uther Pendragon, a fierce and powerful king of Britain. Uther fell in love with Igraine, the beautiful wife of Gorlois, Duke of Cornwall. Driven by a consuming lust, Uther enlisted the help of Merlin to deceive Igraine. Merlin, a figure of immense wisdom and magical power, agrees to help, but only in exchange for Uther's firstborn son. He uses his magic to transform Uther into the likeness of Gorlois, allowing the king to enter Igraine's castle and lie with her. That night, King Uther, disguised as Gorlois, fathers a child with Igraine. The child, born in deceit and magic, is named Arthur. The very circumstances of Arthur's birth carry the seeds of betrayal. His conception is a betrayal of Igraine's husband, Gorlois, who is killed in battle the same night, unaware of the deception. It is also a betrayal of the natural order, a manipulation of destiny by magic. The price for this magical act is the surrender of the child to Merlin, a betrayal of Uther's parental duty. Merlin takes the infant Arthur and places him in the care of a trusted knight, Sir Ector, to be raised in secret, ignorant of his royal lineage. This act, while perhaps a form of protection, is another layer of separation, a fundamental deception that shapes Arthur's entire life. As we imagine young Arthur growing up in a quiet, rural household, we are looking at a boy who is blissfully unaware of the immense destiny that awaits him. He is raised as the son of a knight, not a king, learning the skills of combat and chivalry, but without the weight of a royal title. This humble upbringing sets him apart from other noble children, instilling in him a sense of fairness and a connection to the common people that will later define his reign. The landscape he grows up in is a world of rolling hills, ancient forests, and scattered farmsteads, far from the courts and castles of the great lords. The air is cool and damp, and the rhythm of life is tied to the seasons, the planting and harvesting, and the constant threat of violence from the encroaching Anglo-Saxons. The world is a dangerous place, and the young Arthur is being forged in its crucible, unknowingly preparing for the moment when his true identity will be revealed, a moment that will forever change the course of Britain. The kingdom of Britain, without a clear successor to the late King Uther Pendragon, was slowly tearing itself apart. The great lords, each with their own ambitions, vied for power, their squabbles threatening to plunge the land into total civil war. The unity Uther had briefly established was crumbling, and the people of Britain, still facing the looming threat of the Anglo-Saxons, were left without a true leader. The land cried out for a king, a sovereign who could unite the disparate factions and restore a semblance of order. In this moment of profound crisis, the old sorcerer Merlin, ever watchful of the destiny he had set in motion, devised a plan to reveal the true heir. Merlin used his immense magical powers to create a test, a definitive sign that no man could argue with. On Christmas Day, the nobles and knights of the realm were gathered in London for a great tournament. In the courtyard of the city's largest church, a marvel appeared before them. A large marble stone, and embedded within it was a magnificent sword. The hilt was adorned with jewels, and on the blade an inscription was written in golden letters, visible for all to see. The inscription declared that, "Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone and anvil is rightwise king born of all England." This was the sign, a challenge set by fate itself, to prove who was worthy of the crown. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and greed. Each lord, each knight, looked at the sword and saw a symbol of their own power and destiny, not a test of worthiness. For the young Arthur, now a squire under the care of Sir Ector, the day held no such grand meaning. He was there to assist his foster brother, Sir Kay, who was competing in the tournament. As the day wore on, Sir Kay, in his haste and excitement, realized he had forgotten his sword back at their lodging. Frustrated and determined not to miss his chance to prove himself, he sent Arthur to retrieve it. Arthur, ever dutiful, hurried back, but found the lodgings locked and deserted. Unwilling to fail his brother, he scanned the area for a replacement sword. His eyes fell upon the magnificent sword plunged into the stone in the churchyard. To Arthur, it was simply an unattended weapon, a potential solution to a simple problem. He had no knowledge of its significance, no ambition to be king. He saw only the need of his brother. With the quiet conviction of a boy performing a chore, Arthur approached the stone. The great lords and knights, who had all tried and failed to pull the sword, were preoccupied elsewhere. Arthur, with no crowd to watch or judge him, reached out and grasped the hilt. The sword, which had resisted the strength of the strongest men in the kingdom, slid out of the stone with surprising ease. There was no struggle, no heroic effort, just the simple act of a boy fulfilling a task. He didn't understand the magnitude of what he had done. He simply took the sword and returned to Sir Kay. When Arthur presented the sword to him, Sir Kay immediately recognized it. Overcome by a moment of ambition, he claimed that he was the one who had pulled the sword from the stone, a lie that would later become a betrayal of a different kind. Sir Ector, however, was a man of honor. He knew the truth and insisted that they return to the stone to verify the miracle. In front of all the assembled lords and knights, Arthur placed the sword back into the stone. One by one, the mightiest men of the realm strained and struggled, their faces red with effort, but the sword remained steadfastly in place. Then Arthur, a youth with no lineage or power they knew of, stepped forward. With a simple, unassuming motion, he drew the sword out once more. A hush fell over the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief and anger. The lords, unable to accept that a boy of no noble birth could be their king, were not filled with reverence, but with fury. They had witnessed the divine sign, but their pride and greed would not allow them to acknowledge it. This resistance to the rightful heir is an early form of betrayal, a betrayal of the kingdom's needs for their own selfish desires. Merlin, sensing the rising tension, stepped forward to reveal the truth of Arthur's parentage, announcing that he was the son of Uther Pendragon. Despite this revelation, many of the nobles refused to believe him. It took time and repeated demonstrations of his ability to draw the sword for Arthur to finally be accepted, not just as a king, but as a symbol of hope. The sword from the stone, often called the sword of kingship, is a powerful symbol. It represents the idea that true leadership comes not from lineage or brute force, but from an inherent worthiness, a purity of heart. It is this quality, this simple honesty and lack of ambition, that allows Arthur to succeed where others fail. His innocence and duty, born from a life away from the court, are what make him the chosen one. As the kingdom slowly begins to recognize its new ruler, a new chapter begins. Arthur, once an unknown boy, now stands at the precipice of destiny, ready to forge a new world, a kingdom of ideals that will soon be tested by the very nature of human fallibility and the betrayals that lie ahead. The foundations of Camelot are being laid, but the cracks are already beginning to form. With the sword from the stone as his undeniable proof, the young King Arthur began the monumental task of uniting a fractured kingdom. His reign would not be built on fear or conquest alone, but on a revolutionary ideal of justice and equality that would forever be associated with his name. As we settle deeper into this world, we find ourselves standing in the early days of Camelot, not a real city on a map, but a glorious, mythical court that embodies the pinnacle of Arthurian civilization. The name itself evokes images of strength, beauty, and noble purpose. Under Arthur's visionary leadership, Camelot became the heart of a kingdom striving for peace and honor, a stark contrast to the brutal, chaotic world that surrounded it. Arthur's genius lay not just in his military prowess, but in his ability to inspire loyalty and a shared sense of purpose. He gathered around him the most courageous and honorable knights in the land, men who had once been his rivals. His court was a vibrant center of culture, with skilled artisans, musicians, and thinkers. The castle, if we can imagine it, was a place of soaring towers and sunlit courtyards, a fortress against the encroaching darkness and a beacon of hope for the kingdom. It was a place where justice was dispensed, where grievances were heard, and where the ideals of chivalry were lived out every day. The landscape surrounding Camelot was one of rolling green hills, dense, ancient forests, and sparkling rivers, a land that was beginning to heal under the rule of its new king. The most profound symbol of Arthur's new order, and the place where his knights would forge their unbreakable bonds, was the Round Table. The concept of a round table was a radical departure from the traditional feudal court structure. In a conventional court, the king sat at the head of a long, rectangular table, a position that emphasized his power and elevated him above his subjects. The Round Table, by contrast, had no head. Every knight who sat at it was equal in stature and voice. This simple piece of furniture was a physical manifestation of Arthur's core philosophy, that all men, no matter their station, were bound by a common code of honor and were equally responsible for the welfare of the kingdom. It created a powerful sense of fellowship, a brotherhood sworn to uphold a code of conduct that would become the very essence of chivalry. The code of chivalry was more than just a set of rules for knights. It was a moral compass for a new society. Knights of the Round Table swore to protect the weak, to right wrongs, to be loyal to their king, and to always speak the truth. They were expected to be brave in battle, but also merciful to their foes, to be courteous to women, and to treat all people with respect. This was an almost impossibly high standard to maintain, and it is in the struggle to live up to these ideals that the seeds of future betrayals would be sown. The very perfection of the code made any fall from grace that much more tragic. The Round Table, for all its idealism, was a fragile creation, its strength dependent on the unwavering honor of its members. Under Arthur, the Round Table became a powerful force for good. His knights, including legendary figures like Sir Lancelot, Sir Gawain, and Sir Galahad, rode out on quests to defeat monsters, rescue damsels, and bring justice to the land. They were a force for stability in an unstable world, their reputation spreading far and wide. The kingdom grew in power and influence, and for a time, it seemed that the dream of a peaceful, just Britain was within reach. The court, with its blend of Roman law, Celtic tradition, and Christian ideals, became a model for what a good society could be. Arthur's reign was not just a period of military victories, but a golden age of culture and spiritual aspiration. Yet, even in this golden age, the first faint whispers of discord could be heard. The very knights who swore allegiance to the Round Table were still human, with all the frailties that implies. Their passions, jealousies, and ambitions were merely lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The king himself, a man of profound goodness, was blind to the faults of those he loved most. The ideals of the Round Table, for all their beauty, were a double-edged sword. They demanded a level of perfection that was unsustainable, setting the stage for the deep personal failures that would ultimately unravel the kingdom. The foundations of Camelot were built on trust, and it is a trust that is about to be tested in the most painful way imaginable, beginning with the arrival of a foreign knight whose loyalty and love would become the kingdom's greatest threat. As the golden age of Camelot flourished, a shadow began to creep into its sunlit courtyards, a shadow born not of external threats, but of internal passions. The Fellowship of the Round Table was a beacon of hope, but it was also a collection of human hearts, susceptible to the same frailties and desires as any other. The central betrayal that would ultimately bring about the downfall of King Arthur's kingdom was a classic love triangle, a tale of forbidden love that compromised the very ideals the Round Table was built upon. This is the story of Queen Guinevere and the greatest knight of all, Sir Lancelot. Lancelot arrived at Camelot as a young man, a knight of extraordinary skill and courage. He quickly became Arthur's most trusted friend and his finest warrior. His deeds were legendary. He defeated giants, rescued maidens, and his name was synonymous with chivalry. Arthur, recognizing his unparalleled virtue and strength, made him the foremost knight of the Round Table. It was an unbreakable bond of brotherhood forged in mutual respect and admiration. However, Lancelot was also deeply devoted to Queen Guinevere, a beautiful and intelligent woman whom Arthur had married to secure his rule. The connection between Lancelot and Guinevere was immediate and profound, a bond that went beyond mere admiration. It was a deep, consuming love that, for all its passion, was a betrayal of their king, their vows, and the sacred trust that held Camelot together. The affair began as a series of furtive glances and secret meetings, a clandestine romance hidden in the shadows of the castle. It was a beautiful and tragic secret. Guinevere, though she loved Arthur, found in Lancelot a passionate and devoted soul who mirrored her own intensity. Lancelot, for his part, was torn between his loyalty to his king and his devotion to his queen. This inner conflict made him an even more complex and tragic figure. He continued to fight valiantly for Arthur's kingdom, his battles and quests a testament to his outward loyalty, even as his heart belonged to another. The betrayal was not a single, malicious act, but a slow, creeping rot that gnawed at the very foundation of trust. The Round Table was founded on the principle of unyielding loyalty to the king, and the greatest knight and the queen herself were engaged in a secret that violated that principle in the most fundamental way. The court of Camelot, for a long time, remained blissfully ignorant. The knights saw only the noble deeds of Lancelot and the grace of their queen. Yet, rumors and whispers eventually began to spread. The first to notice were the less scrupulous knights, men who were jealous of Lancelot's fame and power. They saw an opportunity to sow discord and weaken Arthur's hold on the throne. The betrayal, once a private affair of the heart, was now becoming a political weapon. This is one of the most painful aspects of the story. The betrayal wasn't just the act of two lovers, but the slow erosion of trust that allowed others to exploit the kingdom's vulnerability. The turning point came when two knights, Sir Agravain and Sir Mordred, fueled by jealousy and ambition, decided to expose the affair. They laid a trap, catching Lancelot and Guinevere together in the Queen's chamber. This public unveiling was the final nail in the coffin of the Golden Age. When Arthur learned of the betrayal, his world was shattered. The man he had trusted most, the knight who was the very model of his ideals, had betrayed him with the woman he loved. The king, bound by the very laws he had created, had no choice but to condemn his queen to death by burning. This cruel fate, however, was averted when Lancelot, in a desperate and bloody rescue, fought his way into the execution grounds, saving Guinevere and spiriting her away. In the ensuing chaos, Lancelot killed several of his fellow knights, including Gawain's brothers, an act that turned the former friends into bitter enemies. The love between Lancelot and Guinevere, for all its sincerity, was a destructive force. It was a betrayal that splintered the Round Table into warring factions. The Fellowship, once a symbol of unity, was now a source of conflict. Knights were forced to choose sides, between their king and their fellow knight, between their loyalty to the crown and their personal friendships. This betrayal didn't just hurt Arthur, it tore the kingdom apart from the inside, creating the perfect conditions for the final, catastrophic act of treachery that was yet to come. As we close this chapter, we leave behind a world on the brink of war, its golden age tarnished by the very human failings of its greatest heroes. As the rift between Arthur, Lancelot, and Guinevere widened, a new, more spiritual crisis swept through the court of Camelot. The kingdom, once united by the earthly ideals of chivalry and honor, was now fractured by personal betrayal. In this moment of spiritual disquiet, the legend of the Holy Grail emerged, offering a new path and a new purpose, but also accelerating the decline of the kingdom. The Grail, a sacred vessel said to have been used by Jesus Christ at the Last Supper and to have caught his blood at the crucifixion, was believed to possess miraculous powers. It was a symbol of ultimate purity and divine grace, and the quest to find it became the ultimate test of a knight's spiritual worth. The Grail quest was a profoundly different kind of adventure from the battles and rescues that had defined the early days of the Round Table. Previous quests had been about physical strength, courage, and a knight's ability to uphold the code of chivalry in the material world. The Grail, however, could only be found by a knight who was completely pure of heart, untouched by sin. This quest was not about a king's earthly glory, but about a knight's individual salvation. It was a journey into the soul, a deeply personal and solitary endeavor. For many of the knights, this spiritual journey was a welcome distraction from the political and emotional turmoil gripping Camelot. They yearned for a higher purpose, for a redemption that could heal the wounds of a kingdom in crisis. The call to the Grail quest was a powerful one, and almost all of the Knights of the Round Table departed Camelot in search of it. The sudden departure of so many of the kingdom's greatest warriors was a devastating blow to Arthur's reign. The Round Table, once full of life and purpose, was now nearly empty. The physical absence of the knights created a power vacuum, leaving the kingdom vulnerable to its enemies and to the internal strife that had been simmering beneath the surface. It was a form of spiritual betrayal, a turning away from their oaths to the king and the kingdom in favor of a personal, divine calling. Among the knights, a few stood out. Sir Lancelot, despite his legendary prowess and valor, was a man of great sin due to his affair with Guinevere. The Grail was a test he could not pass, his love for the queen a stain on his soul that barred him from achieving his goal. His failure to find the Grail was a tragic reflection of his internal conflict, a testament to how his betrayal of Arthur had not only hurt the king, but had also cost him his own spiritual destiny. It was a profound illustration of the consequences of their actions. The only knight who was pure enough to find the Grail was Sir Galahad, Lancelot's son. He was a new addition to the Round Table, a young knight of unparalleled innocence and virtue, untouched by the moral compromises of his elders. His purity made him the antithesis of the flawed knights around him, a living embodiment of the ideals the Round Table had originally stood for, but had failed to live up to. His success in the quest highlighted the spiritual failings of the older generation and marked a clear generational and ideological shift. The Grail, a symbol of hope, also became a symbol of the kingdom's moral decay. The knights who returned, or those who failed in their quest, were changed men, some humbled, others filled with a sense of failure. The Fellowship, once a brotherhood, was now a collection of individuals, each carrying the weight of their own spiritual journey. The Grail quest, for all its spiritual significance, was a political disaster for Arthur's kingdom. The kingdom was left weakened and unguarded. The knights who returned were no longer the same cohesive unit. They were more focused on their personal spiritual journeys than on the defense of the realm. The Round Table was irrevocably broken, and with it, the unity of Arthur's kingdom. The quest, intended to purify the court, had instead exposed its fatal flaws and hastened its downfall. The stage was now set for the final act of betrayal, a treachery that would not come from a place of love or spiritual longing, but from pure, unadulterated ambition. As the knights returned to a fractured Camelot, they brought with them a sense of loss and disillusionment, creating the perfect conditions for the final devastating act of treason. The fractures in Arthur's kingdom, once subtle cracks, had now become gaping chasms. With Lancelot exiled, Guinevere disgraced, and the knights scattered by the Grail quest, Camelot was a shell of its former self. The perfect opportunity had arrived for the final, most devastating betrayal of all. This treachery was orchestrated by Mordred, a figure whose relationship to Arthur is a subject of much debate in the legends. Some versions portray him as Arthur's illegitimate son, born of an incestuous affair with his half-sister, Morgause. Other accounts describe him as a treacherous nephew. Regardless of his exact lineage, Mordred was the ultimate betrayal, a blood relative who coveted his uncle's throne and was willing to destroy everything to get it. He was a man without honor, a direct antithesis to the ideals of the Round Table, and his ambition was insatiable. While Arthur and his remaining loyal knights were preoccupied with the war against Lancelot, who had retreated to France with Guinevere, Mordred began his move. He had been left in charge of the kingdom, a position of trust that he now exploited to its fullest. He began to spread false rumors of Arthur's death, claiming that the king had been killed in a foreign war. He used this deception to seize the throne, coercing and bribing the remaining nobles and common people into accepting him as their new king. Mordred's usurpation was a ruthless and calculated act of power, a cold and cynical betrayal that contrasted sharply with the passionate, if tragic, affair of Lancelot and Guinevere. He did not seek to rule for the good of the people. He sought to rule for himself. He took the kingdom that Arthur had so painstakingly built and began to dismantle its values, replacing honor with opportunism and justice with tyranny. The news of Mordred's treachery reached Arthur as he was preparing to invade Lancelot's lands in France. The king was faced with an agonizing choice. He had to abandon his war against his former friend to defend his kingdom from a new internal enemy. The journey back to Britain was fraught with a sense of dread. The land he had once united was now tearing itself apart, not from external invaders, but from the actions of a man from his own family. This was the ultimate failure of his reign. The ideals he had built his kingdom on could not withstand the corruption of a single power-hungry individual. The two armies finally met on the plains of Camelot. The landscape for this final confrontation is often depicted as bleak and desolate, a fitting stage for the end of a golden age. The day was dark and somber, a world-weary land bracing for its final, fatal conflict. On one side stood Arthur and his few remaining loyal knights, a testament to the old order of honor and chivalry. On the other side stood Mordred and his forces, a collection of ambitious lords and mercenaries who saw only a chance to gain power. The battle was a bloodbath, a catastrophic clash that marked the end of the Round Table and the golden age it represented. It was a tragic conflict where brother fought against brother, and the ideals of a generation were shattered on a muddy battlefield. In the midst of the chaos, Arthur and Mordred came face to face. The final confrontation was not a battle between two armies, but a deeply personal duel between a king and his betrayer. The legends describe the fight as a desperate and tragic struggle. Arthur, with his final strength, ran Mordred through with his spear. But as Mordred fell, he delivered a fatal blow to the king, striking him with his sword. Both men fell, their lives ending in a final, mutual act of violence and betrayal. The kingdom, already weakened by internal strife and the loss of its greatest heroes, would not survive the death of its king. The Golden Age was over, replaced by a new era of chaos and conflict. The dream of a united Britain, of a just and honorable society, was buried with its king on the fields of Camelot. As the last remnants of the battle faded, a profound silence fell over the land. The sun, which had shone so brightly on the days of Camelot's glory, now seemed to set on an entire way of life. The betrayal of Mordred was not just an act of treason, it was the final, tragic fulfillment of all the other betrayals that had come before. It was the moment when love, ambition, and a quest for spiritual purity all converged to destroy the greatest kingdom Britain had ever known. We are now left with a dying king and a kingdom in ruin, a somber end to a magnificent story. As the Battle of Camelot drew to a close, a heavy stillness descended upon the blood-soaked field. King Arthur, mortally wounded by the treachery of Mordred, lay dying. His knights, those few who had survived, gathered around him, their grief a tangible thing in the fading light. The dream of Camelot, the vision of a just and united kingdom, was ending not with a glorious victory, but with a somber and tragic defeat. The king, with his last breaths, understood that his time on this earthly plane was over. He had to be taken away, not to a grave, but to a place of myth and healing, a place that had long been a part of Celtic lore. Arthur's final command was for his loyal knight, Sir Bedivere, to take his legendary sword, Excalibur, and return it to the lake from whence it came. This act was not merely a symbolic gesture, it was the final release of the power that had defined his reign. Excalibur was no ordinary sword. It was given to Arthur by the Lady of the Lake, a magical entity from the heart of Celtic mythology. It was a symbol of his divine right to rule, a weapon of immense power and purity. Returning it to the water was an act of closure, a way of returning the magical power of the kingdom to its source as the king himself prepared for his own final journey. Sir Bedivere, however, was overcome by a final small act of betrayal. He was unable to part with the magnificent sword. Its hilt was encrusted with precious jewels, its blade a testament to the king's greatness. He twice went to the lake's edge, but each time he hid the sword in a copse of trees. He returned to the king and lied, claiming he had cast it into the water. But Arthur, with the clear vision of a man on the threshold of death, saw through his friend's deception. He chided Bedivere for his weakness and commanded him to go a third time, this time to obey without hesitation. Finally, Bedivere, filled with shame and sorrow, took the sword and hurled it into the lake. As the sword flew through the air, a hand, clad in white silk, rose from the water, caught the sword by its hilt, and pulled it back down into the depths. The act was completed, and the last vestige of Arthur's earthly reign was gone. With this final task done, Bedivere carried the dying king to the shore, where a barge awaited. The boat was shrouded in mist and attended by 3 queens, including Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's half-sister, and a powerful sorceress. These women were figures of immense power, guardians of the old magic. They had come to take the king to the mythical island of Avalon. Avalon, in Celtic mythology, is a legendary island, often associated with Glastonbury and Somerset, a place of peace, healing, and the dead. It is a place beyond the mortal world, where the boundaries between life and death are blurred. For Arthur, it was the final retreat, a sanctuary where his mortal wounds could be healed. A place where he would sleep until the day his people needed him once more. The boat drifted away into the mists, carrying the last king of a golden age to a world of legend. The sight of the barge disappearing into the mist is a profound and poignant image, a beautiful and gentle transition from the harsh realities of the battlefield to the peaceful realm of myth. The king was not dead. He was merely taken to a place of rest. This is the great promise of the Arthurian legend. The once and future king will return when Britain needs him most. This ending is a testament to the hope that Arthur's ideals, even in the face of complete devastation, are not truly lost. They are merely waiting to be rediscovered. The retreat to Avalon is a powerful metaphor for the end of an era. The betrayal that had shattered his kingdom also gave rise to the enduring hope of his return. The final chapter of Arthur's life is not an end, but a state of suspended animation, a promise of renewal. It leaves us with a sense of peace and tranquility, a fitting conclusion to a story that, despite its tragic betrayals, is ultimately a tale of faith and enduring hope. The land and the people are left to mourn, but also to hold on to the faint but powerful promise that one day the king will rise again. As the mists closed around the barge carrying the wounded king to Avalon, the Arthurian legend transitioned from a historical, though heavily mythologized, narrative into a timeless tale. The story of King Arthur and his betrayals did not end on the field of Camelot. Instead, it began a new life in the collective memory of generations to come. The enduring legacy of Arthur is a testament to the power of storytelling and the deep human need for heroes and ideals. His story became a vessel for a wide range of cultural and political aspirations, evolving and changing with each new era that embraced it. During the Middle Ages, the Arthurian legends flourished. The courtly romance tradition, which swept through Europe from the 12th century onward, adopted Arthur and his knights as its central figures. French authors, in particular, took the raw material of Geoffrey of Monmouth and other chroniclers and added new layers of depth and complexity. It was in this period that we see the character of Lancelot fully developed. his tragic love for Guinevere becoming the cornerstone of the romantic narrative. The spiritual element of the Holy Grail was also a key addition, introduced by writers like Chrétien de Troyes. These new tales weren't just about battles. They were about the inner lives of knights, their moral struggles, and the very nature of courtly love. They helped to define the concepts of chivalry, honor, and romance that we still associate with the medieval period. The legend of Arthur also served a powerful political purpose. English monarchs seeking to legitimize their rule often invoked the name of Arthur as a symbol of their right to govern all of Britain. King Edward I, for example, built a castle at Caernarfon in Wales, consciously drawing on the Arthurian past to assert his dominion over the Welsh people. Later, the Tudor dynasty, particularly King Henry VII, used the legend to solidify their claim to the throne. The Tudors were of Welsh descent, and they saw themselves as the fulfillment of the prophecy that Arthur, a British king, would one day return. Henry even named his first son Arthur in a clear attempt to connect his new dynasty with the legendary past of Britain. The Tudors effectively resurrected Arthur as a national hero, a unifying figure for a kingdom that had been torn apart by the Wars of the Roses. In the Victorian era, the legend of Arthur experienced another major revival. The Victorian period was a time of immense social change and industrialization, and many people looked back to a romanticized past for moral guidance. Alfred, Lord Tennyson's epic poem Idylls of the King, reimagined the Arthurian stories as a grand allegory for the moral struggles of the Victorian age. Tennyson's Arthur was a figure of absolute moral purity, a symbol of Victorian values, and his kingdom's downfall was a cautionary tale about the dangers of moral compromise and betrayal. This version of the legend, with its emphasis on honor, duty, and tragic love, became the definitive Arthur for a new generation. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the legend has been reinterpreted countless times in books, films, and television shows. Each retelling of the story reflects the values and anxieties of its time. Modern retellings often focus on the historical realism of Arthur, portraying him not as a king in shining armor, but as a gritty post-Roman warrior. They explore the politics of the era and the challenges of leadership in a brutal, unforgiving world. Other versions emphasize the magical and fantasy elements, while some delve deeply into the psychological motivations of the characters, particularly the love triangle between Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot. The enduring appeal of the legend lies in its flexibility. It can be a historical saga, a romance, a morality play, or a fantasy epic, all at once. The betrayals that defined Arthur's story, the deception of his birth, the forbidden love of Lancelot and Guinevere, the spiritual abandonment of the Grail quest, and the final treachery of Mordred, are what make the story so human and so powerful. They remind us that even the noblest of ideals are fragile and can be undone by the very human passions of those who hold them. The legend of Arthur is not just a tale of a long-lost king. It is a timeless reflection on the nature of leadership, loyalty, love, and the complex, often tragic choices that define our lives. It is a story that will continue to be told as long as people seek to understand the nature of heroes and the fragility of their dreams. The story of King Arthur is so deeply ingrained in our culture that it feels tangible, almost real. Yet, as we've seen, it's a tapestry woven from myth, history, and romance. As we gently bring our journey to a close, we can look for the faint historical footprints that ground this magnificent legend in the soil of Britain. These aren't the footprints of a knight in shining armor, but the archaeological and literary clues that hint at a real world and a real figure from which the legend grew. The search for a historical Arthur has captivated scholars and archaeologists for centuries, and while a definitive answer remains elusive, the quest itself provides a fascinating glimpse into the world of post-Roman Britain. One of the most compelling sites linked to the Arthurian legend is Cadbury Castle in Somerset. This impressive hill fort with its imposing earthworks was the site of extensive archaeological excavations in the late 1960s. The findings were extraordinary. Archaeologists discovered evidence of a large, well-fortified settlement from the late 5th and early 6th centuries, precisely the time when a historical Arthur would have lived. The settlement featured a great hall and a sophisticated system of defenses, suggesting it was the home of a powerful chieftain or warlord. Could this have been the location of Camelot? While there is no definitive proof, the evidence points to a strong Romano-British leader who was actively resisting the Anglo-Saxon advance, a leader who could very well have been the inspiration for the legendary king. Another key location is Glastonbury Tor, a dramatic hill rising from the Somerset levels. In the Middle Ages, Glastonbury Abbey was a powerful monastery, and its monks, perhaps inspired by the legends, claim to have found the graves of Arthur and Guinevere in 1191. They produced bones and an inscribed lead cross, which they said proved the resting place of the legendary king. While most modern historians dismiss this as a clever piece of political propaganda to attract pilgrims and donations to the abbey, the story itself is a powerful testament to how early medieval people sought to make the legend of Arthur a physical reality. The Tor itself, with its mysterious, mist-shrouded appearance, became firmly associated with the mythical island of Avalon, the place where Arthur was taken to be healed. We must also consider the written sources, the fragile parchment and vellum that hold the earliest glimmers of the Arthurian story. We have already mentioned the Historia Britonum and the Annales Cambriae, which provide the barest outline of a military commander named Arthur. But another source, even more contemporary to the period, is the De Excidio et Conquestu Britanniae, on the ruin and conquest of Britain, by the monk Gildas, written in the 6th century. While Gildas doesn't mention Arthur by name, he does describe the heroic Battle of Badon as a great victory for the Britons, which gave them a period of peace. It is in this context that we can imagine a figure like Arthur leading the defense of his people. The landscape of Britain is itself a character in the Arthurian saga. The ancient Roman roads, crumbling villas, and old Celtic hill forts are the stage upon which these legends were first told. The wild, untamed forests and misty moors of Cornwall, Wales, and Scotland are full of local folklore that links them to Arthurian figures. These place names and local traditions are like breadcrumbs leading us through the mists of history, hinting at a time when a man, perhaps a warlord, a king, or a chieftain, stood against a tide of invaders and became the enduring symbol of his people's hope. The quest for a historical Arthur is less about finding a single, named individual, and more about understanding the world that needed him. The legends of Arthur and his betrayals are not just fictional tales. They are the emotional and psychological record of a people fighting for their identity. They reflect the human drama of leadership, the cost of ambition, and the fragility of even the noblest of dreams. As our journey comes to a close, we are left not with a historical fact, but with a profound truth. The story of King Arthur endures because it speaks to the timeless struggles of humanity, a powerful saga that will continue to resonate as long as we have dreams of a better world and fears of its ultimate betrayal. Now let the sleep come, and perhaps the echoes of this ancient kingdom will find their way into your dreams.